First of all, there is not a single known principle of science that can account for this, period. Past or present, there is not a single principle of science. Second of all, it means that consciousness is not simply a byproduct of brain activity. The brain is in the bed, and it's EEG flat. The patient is brain dead, but the patient is alive and well up at the ceiling. And so there goes the most fundamental assumption of virtually the whole of neuroscience, basically simply refuted by the facts. The fact is that the patient has consciousness, the patient is at the ceiling, and the neurons are in the bed. Or, if it is produced by neurons, you've got to make a very complicated explanation about how it can be separated from them. And so it's beginning to look as if actually consciousness maybe isn't produced by neurons. And then I want to say the patients interviewed after this experience, their whole sense of self is up there, which suggests consciousness isn't something that's locked away inside our brains, but it's the whole of us. It's throughout our bodies. And I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm going to give you a whole new universe picture with this, but let's just stick to this. So, first of all, no known scientific principles can explain this. Second of all, it is separable from the neurons, so it can't be a simple byproduct of brain activity. Moreover, all of our real powers of sensing and feeling and our sense of self are in it. Third thing, we have always assumed the universe has only one principle, matter, or matter and energy, and consciousness is produced by matter, so that gets rid of the problem. Well, there's two principles in the universe. Consciousness is not reducible to neurons, not something produced by neurons. We're beginning to suspect, given this experiment, that consciousness is not something produced by matter. There are two principles. Consciousness is one, and matter is the other at this point. Now, I want to give you a quick sense of how many modern theories are refuted by the facts. Gerald Edelman. Oh, to explain consciousness is just to give the neural correlates. Well, not so. It's no explanation at all. That's the problem. Christoph Koch. Well, the neurons produce consciousness. They don't, obviously. John Searle, with the utmost confidence at the Tucson conference in 2006. Oh, the neurons produce consciousness. Utmost confidence, not a shred of evidence. There is no evidence that the neurons produce consciousness. The conviction that the neurons produce consciousness is an article of faith. It's a very deeply held assumption, and it's been so deeply held and for so long that it looks like the fact. It looks, hey, everybody knows the neurons produce consciousness. Everyone knows that. It's like, everybody knows God disapproves of sex. Everybody knows that. It's the everybody knows syndrome. Okay. Francis Crick, an identity theorist, in his book, The Astonishing Hypothesis. What's his astonishing hypothesis? They love to say, these identity theorists, the mind is the brain. That is the astonishing hypothesis. Well, first of all, this is very old. This is probably the oldest hypothesis there is about the mind in science. Second of all, how can you claim that two things described in completely different terms are the same thing? I mean, this is a very nice article of faith, but, when it comes to the nitty-gritty, how do you do it? And Descartes wrestled with it. Descartes was a dualist because he didn't see any way. Descartes has a very full description of the mind in the Meditations, and he has a very complex description of the body, and he spends a lot of time describing how they can interact in the pineal gland. But there's something in us doesn't like dualisms, and so ever since Descartes formulated it, scientists have been trying to get rid of it. First by reducing mind to matter. Well, okay, they can't do that. Near-death experience won't allow it. So at this point, everybody has to be at least a dualist. And then Steven Pinker, well, the mind is just the computational organs of the brain. Well, it isn't. The mind is the mind, and actually there's a very good description of it in Descartes. It's that which doubts, feels, thinks, wills, imagines. It's our subject. He's describing our subjectivity. Who else is out there? Many identity theorists hold these views. The most interesting, John Searle certainly holds it. I suspect Bernard Bars and Anthony Freeman hold it. The Journal of Consciousness Studies has its own biases. Almost every scientist who is now trying to propose some theory of consciousness holds to the conviction that the neurons produce consciousness, and the deepest faith of all, the consciousness is something produced by matter. And that's really what's in question here. And boy, no one wants to go there. The most interesting theory is probably that of Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff. Because it's a quasi-quantum mechanical model for the mind, which they claim can be tested. But I'm going to tell you that, in my opinion, Roger's theory falls by his own axe. At the end of The Road to Reality, where he admits that we don't know what physical reality really is, then he comes to give his own theory of consciousness. And he says, well, consciousness is out there in physical reality, just like everything else. And then he gives this very complicated model he calls orchestrated reduction, which has everybody in a tizzy and actually very excited because it looks like it's serious science, quantum mechanics. Well, the truth is, if Roger's right, if we don't know what physical reality really is, then physical reality could just as well be in consciousness as consciousness in physical reality, and the question is completely open. And in fact, I'm going on to say that Roger's theory falls by his own axe, and that consciousness is a bigger term, and that's what we're heading toward. We're heading toward a universe that is not the safe little matter and mechanism universe we are all used to. It's something much bigger. And when I tell you where I live and how I came to this understanding, you'll come to it too. I want to say that at this point, every theory being advanced to explain consciousness is already an expression of consciousness. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I haven't made it the fundamental principle. I'm just saying virtually every modern theory of consciousness that thinks it's produced by neurons in the brain founders on the near-death experience. It is simply refuted by the facts. And so at this point, here we have it, and this is where I'm going to leave it for today because this is a lot to say. At this point, one, there isn't a single principle of science that can explain the near-death experience. Two, since consciousness is separable from the body and all our powers seem to be in it, there are at least two principles in the universe, consciousness and matter. Three, so that refutes materialism, any kind of materialism, scientific or other. And so what have we refuted? We refuted time to look at those basic assumptions. What is now in question are three basic assumptions. One, that consciousness only emerges at the end of evolution in us and some of the higher animals. Two, that it's produced by neurons in the brain, but it's not real in itself. It's the brain that's doing the work. And then the third and the deepest assumption of all, that consciousness is something produced by matter. And this is where I am going to say, okay, give up those assumptions and we'll have a science of consciousness. The reason that we have no science of consciousness is the failure to give up those assumptions. Descartes laid the foundations of the modern world and modern science in a couple of nights when he found himself stranded in a foreign town with nothing to do. And he started to think. And he formulated the mind-body problem as these scientists have been trying to solve ever since. Tucson Conference has been meeting 20 years. It is time to look at those assumptions, especially in the light of the near-death experience, and to abandon them and say, maybe every one of them is false. Maybe consciousness doesn't just come at the end of evolution. Maybe it's not just in us and some of the higher animals. Maybe it's there all along. Two, it's not just something produced by neurons because it's separable from neurons. Three, maybe matter doesn't produce consciousness. And in fact, I'm going to say we're in the position of Copernicus. I am going to propose a new Copernican revolution among our fundamental explanatory terms. Right now, the fundamental terms for the universe are matter and energy. I am going to say consciousness is what's first and fundamental in the universe. We're going to turn this right around. Matter and energy does not produce consciousness. I'm going to invert those terms, and I'm going to say what's fundamental. Consciousness is the fundamental term for the universe. It's there from the beginning. Everything has it. And all of the true explanatory principles of the universe and all of the true causalities are in it. The true causalities of the universe belong to consciousness, not matter or matter and energy. Now, just think of it. What's matter? What is matter then? Matter is an expression of consciousness. To answer Roger Penrose's question, we don't know what physical reality really is. We don't know what matter really is. Matter and physical reality are an expression of consciousness. Let's try it all the other way around. And maybe like Copernicus, we'll find, lo and behold, all of the anomalous mountain of discordant detail and weird facts in modern science will fall neatly into place. And I would say every human problem will go down like a line of dominoes before this term consciousness. I'm proposing a new paradigm, a single and simple principle, consciousness. Now, what is my reasoning for this? First of all, evolution makes us continuous with everything else. It would not be in us if it weren't in everything else also. I think to think that consciousness is an emergent property is false. This is not the way to think about consciousness. So I'm making an evolutionary extension backwards, and I'm going to make a reduction upwards. If consciousness is in us, it's there in everything else too. And the second claim I'm going to make, Einstein said once of the universe, he said, we're schoolboys playing on a beach and we can never understand the universe. I'm going to say, dare to believe that the universe is simple and we can understand it because we are part and parcel in and of the universe that we are trying to know. and we can know it. And it's much simpler than anybody thinks that it is. And I'm going on to propose what I call the consciousness paradigm, or just the consciousness universe. We have to get used to thinking this way. If consciousness is the basic term for the universe, what is causality going to look like? What are the real causalities of the universe? What are the true explanatory principles? The forces, matter and mechanism, chance and necessity, or is something completely different happening? And I'm going to say, after centuries, this problem goes right back to the start of science, and I'll talk about that when we talk again. But I'm going to say, after years of fruitless search, not all of it in vain, we finally have the right axioms. And the right axioms are: 1, the basic term for the universe is consciousness. 2, all of the explanatory terms are in it. Now, those are the fundamental new axioms, and those are the basic premises of a science of consciousness, and I will say of a whole new and true science. I am in all the male minds that we know of emphasize the difference between human beings and other beings. We have consciousness, they don't. We are the lords and masters of the planet. The planet is nothing, something to be trampled underfoot. I emphasize what we have in common with everything else. The men have made such a gulf between us and other things that it can never be bridged. That's the problem of the world. That's why we can apply our technology so wantonly without having to realize that we're connected to everything. We think we're separate, which is, of course, how the male mind works. We're separate, and we have to control it because it's frightening. Take out that fear word. We have to control it, and it's up to us to control it. I emphasize our likeness to everything. Evolution makes us continuous. And I say, at this point, I propose this new Copernican revolution. Okay, what does it mean for matter, physical reality? They are expressions of consciousness. Consciousness is the fundamental term. This is a new, simple, single principle as befits a new age. And I would say the whole universe is, I'm going on to lay this out, is either consciousness in form, i.e. physical matter, or consciousness formless, consciousness in purely spiritual realms. And so I emphasize our likeness to let the barriers go down. Now we can start thinking in the terms of the absolutely necessary new paradigms: connection, oneness, continuum, a continuous, I'll spell this out in the universe, but those are my principles, that's where they're coming from. We are part of the universe, we can know it. We've just been running up against a wall because we have these outmoded concepts of matter. Even Roger Penrose, radical as he is, in the end cannot escape this fundamental faith of science that it's all really matter and consciousness is produced by matter. And it's time to radically abandon those 3 assumptions: that consciousness is only in us, that it's produced by neurons in the brain and not doing very much, and that actually consciousness is produced by matter. I'm going to say it's the other way around. Try it the other way around, and let's see how many things work. And so, let me sketch a new universe, not mechanics, not matter and mechanism, but awake, aware, inspirited, intelligent, creative throughout. What about the earth? What about the earth? Well, I'm looking out at an ancient tree. The trees are just as conscious as we are. I have a wonderful cat here who doesn't seem to know that the ecosystems are collapsing. She lives in the moment. I learn more from her than anyone. She's the greatest Zen master I've ever studied with. Conscious as we are. Expressions of consciousness in physical form. The whole thought tradition, the whole male thought tradition, has described the animals as machines, automata, cleverly wired machines. The animals are just awake and alive and aware as we are. They're intelligent. They have their own degrees of freedom. They make up their own minds. A very different earth picture. The male mind, male science has created a dead universe and a dead earth, first in concepts, now in the lived life. And it has, and the whole image, the scientific image of nature, which David Chalmers said, maybe we need to revise. Yes, we need to revise it, because his whole scientific image of nature as just things devoid of consciousness is what's really enabling the destruction of the earth. We have never gotten the earth right because science has never gotten matter right, because the male mind has never gotten women right, because the masculine has never gotten the feminine right. I mean, on it goes. We are in a revolutionary moment in our history. We need a new science, and I say that make this shift, and first of all, make this new Copernican revolution, and first of all, we'll have a science of consciousness. Second of all, we'll have a new universe picture and a new earth that may enable us to chart our future right. And we will be able to reconnect with the living, vibrant reality around us in a way we have never connected with it, because when we look out, we just see all things, commodities and resources, chop it down, no soul, nothing to have to worry about there, just things. And that's where we are. And so what I'm going on now in other talks is to spell out this whole new universe picture. It's a new heaven, it's a new earth, it's a new universe, and it's a new human being. The greatest question of every person and of philosophy itself and of all of the human race is, who are we? Who am I? Who are we? This question has been answered by scientists mainly of late. We're a naked ape. We're matter and mechanism. We're the victims of genes, drives, parents, you name it. The forces, this mechanical, material model informs everything we think about, everything. And I am proposing that we abandon this mechanical model for stuff. Now, this means at the heart of the modern world is an asymmetry. On one side is matter and mechanism, / the other side is consciousness. The whole of science in the modern world has come down on the wrong side. It thinks that this is an asymmetry. It thinks matter and mechanism can produce consciousness. I'm going to say it's the other way around. Consciousness is the wider, richer, and more inclusive term, and it can account for matter and mechanism in a way that I'm going to show. Does this mean modern science, look out, our wonderful technologies, everything is false? No. Modern science is a partial, limited view. I call it the Cartesian view of things. In a wider, richer, more inclusive view where consciousness is the fundamental term for the universe. It's like Euclidean geometry to non-Euclidean geometry. Non-Euclidean is the wider term. Our ordinary world is Euclidean, but it nests in a wider term. Now we have to go on. I'm going to go on next talk to say where these models are coming from, talk more about Descartes, where we have missed it and why, pretty important, of necessity, and I'm going to reinterpret most of the data of modern science for you, including quantum mechanics, quantum physics, the forces, technology, the fundamental structures of the universe, the atoms, the molecules, the basic, I'm going to go on and reinterpret all of these things according to a principle of consciousness. Especially, I'll just let on this one, 97%, scientists believe something like 97% of the energy of the universe they call dark energy. They don't know where it is, what it is. I would say the 97% of the universe, it's dark energy, not visible, is actually infinite spiritual worlds showing up in the interstices of our own. Just sketch a quick universe picture. There are probably infinite consciousness, purely consciousness universes, and infinite physical universes. And this enormous energy that baffles everyone because it seems to be far, far more energy than is in our little miserable physical system, beautiful as it is. It belongs to the infinite spiritual world showing up even in our living rooms. You know, empty space is not empty. Empty space is fields and fields of consciousness. And I will go on to sketch out what I call the Cartesian universe and the consciousness universe. The Cartesian universe, like the male form of being, is full of discrete, separate, disconnected things. The consciousness universe is a continuum of interacting fields of all forms of consciousness. Trees, cats, worlds out of sight, infinite spiritual universes. Now, it's a pretty breathtaking view of things, and we'll end up with a pretty breathtaking view of ourselves. So let's leave there from today, because that's a lot to think about. But those are my claims. That's my new Copernican revolution. Here's the beginning of a sketch of a new universe picture and a new Earth picture. And oh boy, just wait till I get to human beings, because we have become a great problem to ourselves. And that's the real reason that we're such a problem for the planet. If we can get ourselves right and the Earth right, then we'll have a future for life on Earth. And so I rest my case. Peace.